Okay. Okay. All right. I'm Mike Moscolo. This is Creating Common Ground. And you are?
Michael Bassagis.
Hi, Michael Bassagis. We are going to continue our conversation from the last time we spoke. And then we were talking about the role of power in the process of creating common ground. And the issue is, can you create common ground when you have two parties who have different power, where there's a power differential? And if I recall, we had come to a point where I think we were agreeing on four criteria, four things that someone who is in a position of lack of power or can do to achieve parity in power, or at least to move toward that direction, so that common ground can be created. The first was organization. There needs to be some sort of an organizing movement among the less powerful people. The second is civil disobedience, non-cooperation, and nonviolent communication. The third is the creating common ground tenet of seeking to meet the needs of the other as well as the self whenever possible. And the fourth is trying to create a systemic solution, and particularly a systemic analysis of power differentials and needs and interests, rather than a piecemeal or individual set of individual analysis that focuses on individual issues or individual people. Does that sound right?
Did you mention nonviolence there?
Yes, I did. Okay, good. And then we got into that.
A couple of those things have to do with the presumption that it's easier for people to do things, to continue to do things the way they've been doing them.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as that option is available, it's less likely that the kind of constructive process that creating common ground entails will occur. And so in some way, closing the option to continue to do exactly what you've been doing.
Stopping the other from being able to do what they were doing, which is hurting you. Could you give an example of that? Is that possible? I mean, there's many different ones. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
well, the particular example, continuing to elect politicians for whom having a strong alliance with big business interests is a part of how they understand their political pathway, the conditions of political success. I mean, that would be one thing. As long as voters keep voting for such candidates, and such candidates are able to get the support and use the financial resources, it's like Citizens United issue of
so showing those politicians that they're not going to be able to get what they want. That is to say, to get elected.
Right. No longer build a majority as long as they're maintaining those alliances.
Okay, good, great. And the second issue that what this has moved into is a discussion of language. And how does the less powerful party use language in order to, as among these strategies of gaining parity and power, so that they can get into a position where they can begin to create common ground. And so toward that end, we began to talk about political situations that we have now, and the obvious one is the Black Lives Matter movement. And we began to look at the website for the certain language, the website on creating of Black Lives Matter. And I could show you that now, and I could show you that, and so that some of the things that we were discussing we could talk about. So here's the website.
One question we're looking at this with is this effective for the goals of organizing we were talking about?
That is correct.
And two, is it violent, and is it perpetuating the cycles of violence?
That's right. Does this, or is it going to work?
Yeah,
is it going to
yeah,
work? In what ways will it work? So
right. We have two criteria for work here.
what are they?
One is the equalization of the power.
Yes.
The other is the not engaging with the other in a violent way.
Yes. Okay, great. Let's do it. Let me just read this here just so that we are on the same page. I think this is the one. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. Black Lives Matter Foundation, Inc. is a global organization in the US, UK, Canada, whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. By combating and countering acts of violence, creating space for Black imagination and innovation, and centering Black joy, we are winning immediate improvements in our lives. And it goes on, and there's many, many more, but that's a start. To start in identifying what the ideology of the Black Lives Matter movement is in its formal sense, as in contradistinction, say, to Black Lives Matter with small letters, if you will, which people may or may not understand the ideology of the movement. So when I look at this, there are some power words here that I see. There are expressions that are divisive rather than expressions that would create common ground, in my view. Go ahead.
Okay, so we got to, it seems, be more finely grained about this, because we're agreeing that power language is important, in that it's important to recognize differences in power, understand how they're maintained. So we can't equate the use of terms relating to power with violence. The
I'm not
idea
suggesting
that,
that.
excuse me?
I'm not suggesting that.
Okay. So the first power term I see is white supremacy,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
clearly, and so that's one of the first. Is that violent language, or is that a useful organizing objective or a useful long-term goal?
Right. Before we move forward, it might be helpful to point out that we're two white guys talking about this, right? To acknowledge that. Okay, good.
Because we're by and large on the more powerful end.
That's right. That's right. Indeed. And we acknowledge that. At least I acknowledge that, and you do too, right? So I don't equate the term white supremacy with violence. When I say that, I think from my point of view, when I say it's a power term, is that it is a term that is totalizing. It's a term, when you look at it, our mission is to eradicate white supremacy. Well, of course, everybody would want to eradicate white supremacy except for white supremacists. And white supremacists is
everyone. I don't
everyone
know.
would everyone would want to eradicate white supremacy except for white supremacists, I would imagine, unless we have a different. Let me finish. So, white supremacy has typically, until the last X years, been understood in terms of white nationalism, KKK, and those types of things. It is now beginning to become used to refer to the entire system.
Yes.
Right. I object to that. I object to that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All
And
right.
so I'm suggesting that the very act of shifting the meaning of that very negative category to include the entirety of a national system, or to imply, or to sloppily imply, if you will, if it's not intended, that that white people or a white group or what have you is characterized by white supremacy. That move is a power move. It's and in saying that, now nobody can be against white supremacy. Since nobody can be against white supremacy, therefore you can't be against whatever this movement is about. That's what I see to be the power move, this totalizing move that characterizes a nation or a group or certain processes in terms of a totalizing or character. I don't think that works. For me, that's distancing. It creates an us versus them, and it actually has the propensity to foment more conflict rather than resolve it. This is a battle. These are fighting words rather than rather than negotiating words to seek to change. If you want to seek to change structures, I don't think that this will bring it unless you're successful in eradicating the other side, and that rarely happens.
See, I really read those words very differently from how you read the words. Yes, I would say white supremacists are those who advocate white supremacy. But white supremacy can describe a condition in which we live, in which the likely outcomes for white people, the likely life outcomes, even matters such as life and death, is different for white people and Black people.
Okay.
So, and just like I would say, I live in a system of capitalism. And so I'm involved in all sorts of ways in capitalist relationships. I mean, I save money, I earn money with money as opposed to work. All these capitalist behaviors I engage in. I haven't seen any alternative to living without engaging in this world. But I'm not an advocate of capitalism. I would call an advocate of capitalism a capitalist. And that's very different from playing my active role in perpetuating capitalist systems.
Got it. So note several things.
If what we're trying to do, if this were trying to do, as you say, I think that would be very violent to say that anybody who benefits from these systematic differences in power is a white supremacist. I would agree that that would be inaccurate. It would be, that most people would not feel seen in that, which does not create conditions for creating common ground.
Okay.
But I don't see it as doing that. I see it as making a distinction between that analysis at the level of systems and the analysis at the level of individual beliefs.
Right. So what you're doing is you're making a distinction, it seems to me, between the institutionalized racism and personal racism, which is an important distinction to make.
And participating in an institution versus the advocacy of the maintenance of that institution.
Okay, good, gotcha. You talk about capitalism versus a capitalist. So capitalism would be the system and the capitalist would be the person. The white supremacy is the system and the white supremacist is the person. Well, wait a minute. Is the United States a capitalist? Does the United States have a capitalist economy? Well, you might want to say yes. Well, except it's got all types of non-capitalist.
Right.
It's got Social Security. It's got efforts toward health care. It's got government bailouts when there is times of crisis. You've got the federal. So it's not.
Like every country in the world, there is a mixture.
There's a mixture. So therefore, it is, it is a deception in the sense to refer to. There are no pure types. You just said.
Right.
And so that there is so that capitalism, American capitalism, is that term is a term that is used to parse our experience. It's a framework, but it's wrong in a sense, as all terms are wrong, because it's not a pure capitalist system.
Right.
And so it's got all these other elements to it. When we say capital, we characterize its character and we fix its character, in my view. We totalize its character. We say it is capitalist. In the same way that, in my view, this statement says white supremacy, that it is a white supremacist system. It does not contain other elements, it totalizes and fixes it. And there is no such thing as any sort of a fixed something or other. And so in that sense, again, I believe that its power is in totalizing the system. The system, I believe, is not a white supremacist system. It may have, we can say it is we do not live, in my view, in a racist nation. We live in a nation that has racism. We live in a nation that has enormous racism, we could say. We live in a nation that has racially organized systems. Anybody who looks at our nation and says that if racism is a system of advantage based on race, nobody can look at our system and say that it is not does not have systems of advantage based on race. But that is different than characterizing the entire system as one way, which serves rhetorical purposes, and the rhetorical purposes are, people, if you don't want to be racist, buy into the idea of white supremacy, and then the people who can't do that become othered. The whole point that I would like to advance is to try to find a way not to other each other. And while at the same time saying, no, you can't do this to me, holding up one hand, you hold up the other hand to the soft underbelly of the other person to seek their humanity, and in so doing, effect change. But by calling a system in which we live white supremacist, um, uh,
Now,
calling I'm with you, calling the system white supremacist characterizes and totalizing it, and it also
there's a difference between
it
calling a
diffuses
system.
the distinction between the institutional and the individual. It diffuses that. It makes that less clear. If one wants to be clear, then one
Yeah.
needs to make that clear. So I think there's two problems. One is the totalizing aspect of it, and the two is the erasure of the distinction between the collective and the individual. Happens all the time, in my view.
So I certainly agree that a more fine-grained analysis is better than a less fine-grained analysis. Right now, you have two candidates for president in the US who are, I would say, pro-capitalist. In Portugal, you have a governing party, is the Socialist Party, and they are staying in government by making alliances with left parties. They certainly, most of the things are how to deal with business that come up. And they're very clear about the importance of maintaining good relationships with business and understanding the role private business plays in the society. So even though they're called the Socialist Party, they are not trying to eradicate capitalism from Portugal. They're saying, as a government, our job is to serve the people and make sure that capitalism is working for the people's interests, not against. Whether that's a possible vision, involves a lot of fine-grained debate. But on the one hand, there are differences between the political policies and rhetoric of different countries that are worth noting. And there isn't any country in the world that doesn't have a mixture of government obligation to the people
Why not accentuate that mixture? Why not embrace the complexity rather than to reduce the
Yeah,
complexity by using terms like capitalist, socialist as totalizing, or white supremacist or non-white supremacist?
I agree. I agree that, that more fine-grained analysis is better than more totalizing analysis. We should try to do that all the time. But what I didn't, you said, you took the word white supremacy and you read it as white supremacist.
Okay.
And that that was a big leap in the last thing you said. And to say that a system is characterized by white supremacy, or that the whole set of power relations in a geographic area is characterized by a situation of white supremacy, which can be measured in all sorts of ways.
Really, I don't see it. Let's take the word supremacy. Okay, what does that word mean?
One
Supreme,
has more power than the
superior.
other.
Doesn't say that. It says white supremacy. It doesn't say that the power differentials are distributed in a certain way. It doesn't say
Ah,
that. It says white supremacy. And what you just said, characterize. Yes, it's characterization. It paints it all with too broad a brush. White supremacist. And besides that, you've got a history here that you have to look at very, very carefully. It's the supremacy here, so that I'm better than you, or you know, it says that the structure of the thing is this particular way, this particular form. It's too global. It's too totalizing, and it sets up an us versus them. There's nothing inclusive. There's nothing that reaches out to the other side
there
while
was an
holding up your
us.
hand.
I mean, if you look at it historically, there was, it was in a context, but Black people were taken from their homes and made into slaves.
Yes.
That's about as clear domination as you can imagine.
Yes.
The forms of domination have been lessened gradually over the history of the United States.
Yes.
Right? There has been improvement in radical domination to more statistical pattern, harder to see, not included in law, but more in patterns of human behavior kind of supremacy. So acknowledging all of that movement seems really important.
Yes, of course.
There's also, and I don't know who to credit this idea with, but there's the way in which our language and our daily thinking. I mean, Habermas would certainly say when the ways in which we do empirical analytic research and the ways in which we do historical hermeneutic research are shaped by shared understandings or ideas that are somehow compatible with or even provide justification for those factual inequities, the ideology becomes part of the problem.
Yes.
There's the domination in who has power, and then there's the domination in the ideology that justifies
Yes.
the power dominance. I would see both of these as part of the white supremacy that Black Lives Matter is trying to eradicate.
Okay. Note that that when you talked about slavery, and then when you talked about ideology, you used the term shared. Okay, so that there's a shared ideology. Um, any culture, we sometimes think that cultures are systems of shared beliefs, practices, and values. Well, they're not. They're systems of shared and contested values. No, but there is no belief that everybody shares. It's always distributed. It's always variegated in some way. They may be held together by some sort of a common glue, but even that's variegated. And so the idea, for example, if people during slavery, during when that was happening, uh, to be sure, I'll bet you that the vast majority of white people felt that they were superior to black people, but there was also um, those who did not, and those who
Right.
contested that, and
That's the
the
same thing
the
about black people. The
yes.
majority of black people thought they were inferior,
Yes,
but there
and
were
so
some
the
black.
Constitution does not mention, um, it is unfulfilled. It is an unfulfilled dream, but it did. It paved the way by virtue of the vagueness of the language that was explicitly chosen to be vague because of the contest between people about slavery and all the rest of it, and when laws are big. The very vagueness of that says that there was an element of already in that thinking that was pushing against racism, pushing against slavery, and
Yes.
again what I'm saying is that what I dislike about these terms is their totalizing nature. I think that if they're more it's not helpful to speak of the nation or the nation as a totalizing entity. We need that's my main point. That's my main point. We have
It
to
seems
talk
like
about the things you're
you
talking about.
see more of that the way you think of people kind of gets extended to the way you think of countries. Um,
Yes, I mean if you
Whereas, precious metals, you might, well, let's say geography, which has something to do with where the precious metals lie and which countries have more natural resources and so on. It seems like nobody could be accused of being to blame that all of the diamonds are under Africa, right?
okay.
But that when it comes to social arrangements that are always to some degree shared and to some degree contested, and it's kind of a measure of the level of domination, including in academia, how much contest you hear on the media. I mean, you know, I'd say 98% of what I see on the media is consistent with neoliberalism. It is the dominant spread ideology. It certainly has its opponents, but when something is that dominant in terms of it's what people hear day after day after day,
Mhm,
that the reasons are all technical
mhm,
and scientific
mhm,
why this arrangement of power is better for humanity.
mhm, mhm.
That it's reasonable to say that this is a dominant ideology, right? While arguing, yes, there are always people contesting things and
I have no
effectively
problem with that.
contesting things.
Wow,
So,
in my opinion, that's an advance. This is a dominant ideology.
yes,
And then you have to look at the this part of it. Now you're embracing the complexity. There's dominant ideologies. And we could say something like in economics, neoliberalism is is a dominant ideology. But when we look at the aftermath of Floyd and Black Lives Matter and of Me Too and of Bernie Sanders, who incidentally I would have voted for. When we look at all these things, well, that's not a neoliberal point of view. That's a pretty far left point of view that alienates a lot of other people in the United States. So even then, economically, you've got one thing dominant. Socially, you've got more competing things dominant. It's not a monolith.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not a monolith. And again, my point is that to use such terms is more divisive, and I think that there are better ways to do it.
Well,
We need
should
to
we go
we
back to the language and see how we might improve on it?
sure
If we let's say we want to preserve that it's trying to direct people's attention to how the system as a whole, including both the human behavior involved and the justifications for those behaviors.
Okay.
That it's good in trying to paint a picture of what current conditions are.
Yeah, I don't
But
think we're
how
going to
to
be able
do
to
it,
do this very quickly. We only have a few minutes left. Maybe we can do a quick approximation and then work on it a little bit more next time or something.
okay. Well, what would
Um,
you substitute for after it says whose mission is to eradicate?
um, whose mission is to again, I'm thinking off the top of my head, is to
Mhm.
transform uh, social, economic, and political relations in such a way as to create, um, uh, to promote the well-being of, of uh, to promote to promote equality and the well-being of all people or something like that. That's a very rough first approximation.
And
See, I
what that
believe.
leaves out is any mention that Black people have been victims and have been getting the short end of
Oh,
this.
I think that'd be a very important thing to put in there. Absolutely.
How to
But
put
I
that
can't do
in.
it in 2 seconds. That's my
Yeah,
problem. Absolutely. To see what you've been calling the power analysis,
yes.
what you're calling it, we need to have a clear understanding of the analysis of power and the history of the analysis of power. I think that that's very important. And I also think that, it'd be an interesting conversation to have because you and I may differ on what we take to be the element of power or what the history is. So, for
Mhm.
example, and no, I'm not going to give a clear example because we're going to go in another direction.
Just,
Let's stop.
well, we can bookmark it for the
Let's
future.
bookmark it. Let's stop now.
You don't
And
tell me what the example is?
I'll tell you the example. The example is what you're talking about, the diamond mines. Okay. And you were talking about blame. All right, we can blame the I don't know who they were. What was it? The Dutch? I have no idea.
Yeah,
Who is
people
it?
who stole the
People
non-Africans who stole what
stole it.
was under
Right,
Africa. That's
right.
a, but the
Now,
geography where the metals are distributed under the earth.
right. All I want to say about this, I don't want to justify taking diamonds from Africa. All I want to do is I want to say we want to blame those people who did that. Let's put them in a context, and we'll put them in the context of seeking wealth, seeking to dominate others to get the wealth, wanting to improve one's economic condition and all the rest of this. These are human things. These are human things. They lead to horrors. They lead to horrors. But
But
you know,
that's
it,
not what, okay, for next time,
that's
that's
right. I
not
didn't want
what
to get
Peter
into it.
Gable
That's right.
was saying, right? I don't know, we may or may not agree with him, but he was saying what's most human is to love and to care about the other and to build things together,
Um,
not to take something away.
no, that's wrong.
Okay,
Um,
so what,
uh, no, I got to
but
say this.
even,
I got to say this. I got to say this. I would go with John McMurray, where John McMurray, the theologian, says that we live in a constant tension between fear for the self and love for the other. So that again, I don't want to totalize. I don't want to totalize. To neglect the
okay,
aspect of self-interest is a very bad thing, and it
okay,
also neglects the darkness in us, if you will. And so I do believe that we can transcend the distinction between self-interest and love for the other
okay.
by creating a sense of who I am, an identity in
I
which.
like what you did because that was a dialectical formulation. We
Yes.
live in the tension between.
Mm-hmm.
And what, again, what side is dominant at any point in time may vary, but the tension is there.
Yep.
But so for a next step, would you try to rewrite this,
Oh,
just this
gracious me.
first part, in a way that removed the totalizing from it, but also
Well, I'd be happy to try. I'm a little loath to again to have two white guys or one white guy reformulates this type of a thing. You see what I'm saying? Because it can't help but to not represent the people that or the movement or the sensibilities that we're trying to represent. So I mean, I could do it, but with that enormous caveat.
You can get 5 black guys and they might all disagree.
Yes, that's
I
true.
mean, we're doing our best to empathize.
Black
That's
women.
all we can do.
Yes.
This
Okay.
notion that you have to have a certain skin color to have a legitimate opinion.
Well, that's part of the discussion right now, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's a very big problem. I mean, you don't have to have a certain skin color to have an opinion or to empathize. But
It's
at the
hard
same
then.
time,
It's such a pervasive experience of Black people growing up that it takes work to
it takes
empathize.
work. And, even though we may never be able to experience that, right? We could sympathize, but maybe we can't fully empathize and that sort of thing. So let's take it up. Let's take this offline so that we'll figure out what's next. And this was terrific.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. We are getting closer and closer, clearer on what we agree on.
I think so.
And
Thank you, Michael.
yeah, I think the next, I think